We're on live. You're listening to the 123 show with me, Noreen Mir, on this Tuesday afternoon. Well, let's turn to our very first guest and topic of today. We are talking about the art of parkour. It's a topic that we've not really talked about on the 123 show. Perhaps we've touched on it when we talked about rooftoping, I think about 6 months ago or 9 months ago. Well, joining us in the studio live right now, we have a parkour coach. We've got Eric Roberts joining us. Eric, it's great to see you today. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
I should mention we are on Facebook Live, Noreen Mir on RTHK Radio 3. You'll be able to see Eric there as well. The Facebook Live, the audio is not as its usual audio because we've had to outsource the cable, if you like, out for our event, Operation Santa Claus this evening. But hey, we're still there, so do join us there, or you can join us via the apps or online or through traditional radio as well. So Eric, let's talk about parkour. How would you describe it? I mean, for some of our listeners who may not have come across it, it's a series of movement on the streets. I mean, what is it exactly?
Yeah, it's easily a confusing question for many because you see a lot of the times in videos and in the media in general, kind of just the most exciting, most kind of extreme visuals of it, but there's a lot behind it, a lot of philosophy that goes along with it. So the way that I often describe it, to kind of bring it to the most essential aspect of it, is overcoming obstacles. So it's a training methodology. It's actually putting that into practice. It's the practice of seeking challenges, but I always come back to overcoming obstacles. So obstacles can be anything from a wall to a gap between two walls, the hole in a wall, but that also applies to anything else in life. So difficulties you have in your everyday life of, you have a deadline, you have some stress. These are all obstacles too. So parkour is all about learning to navigate and overcome obstacles in any scenario, and then do it well, and then do it a little bit of style, and then for those who are really experienced, to do it in situations that continue to challenge them further and further. So for the people who have been doing it for a long time, that might mean a little bit more exciting with some height, or what might appear dangerous, but that for them is something that they've practiced again and again and again.
That's so cool. I really like that analogy. I'd never thought of it like that, because I'd read the definition of it, sort of overcoming obstacles, but when I visualize it, it's physical obstacles, for example, like you said, a bus stop, a wall, or some steps. But yeah, that philosophy should be and can be applied to life as well. We all face challenges, difficulties that we need to overcome. We are parkouring in a way. So let's talk a little bit more about parkour in Hong Kong, in the Hong Kong context as well. Where would you see a lot of this? Would you see this out on the streets a lot, or is it sort of gatherings that are semi-private gatherings? I mean, how does it work in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, but not exclusively, it takes place in parks. Because parkour itself is about being able to overcome obstacles, like I said, but in any circumstance, any physical space. That happens a lot in the urban environment, and in the urban environment, the space that we can take advantage of the most without people too often saying, hey, what are you doing, don't do that, is a park. So you see it happen a lot of the time in parks, but people who do parkour are looking for interesting setups, interesting obstacle courses, levels, railings, things like that they can take advantage of for their improvement. So it's things that are challenging, that will force them to adapt and get better, and then also things that are just kind of cool to play on. So you'll say, oh, I know exactly what I can do here already. I'm going to do this, this, and this, go over this wall with this vault, and then go under that thing with a different kind of movement, and you're already excited about that space. But then we also seek out new spaces that present challenges that we don't know how to overcome, because part of the process is figuring it out and being creative and improving ourselves in that way. It's a lot about that improvement.
Yeah, because I've seen people practicing parkour in Hong Kong, and like you said, on the parks and whatnot, they sort of leap from a lower level to a higher level,
Oh, yeah.
up a railing, and then maybe walk along there for a few steps, and then jump down again,
Yeah.
and then they go underneath a bench, or I don't know, and then climb up the bench, and then up some more stairs, and then when they're at a high level, they then jump down and then run along. So it's fun to watch. Sometimes I'm like, wow. Let's talk about the process of it. It looks really spontaneous. It looks as though they're just doing whatever comes to mind. Is that the case, or is there some sort of planning involved when they are trying out the different obstacles that they see in the park?
Yeah, it's definitely both. Not a very satisfying answer, but it's definitely both.
No.
Because part of it is you want to be practiced, you want to have the repetition in every single movement that you're learning how to do, but you also want to be able to adapt, like I said, spontaneously. So if you only practice by practicing the same move 100 times, and you do that one move 100 times, that's great. You're really good at doing that one move 100 times. But then many people, their objective is also to be able to move through a space the first time. And to be able to do that, you have to not only have that repetition in place, but you also have to practice spontaneity, practice improvisation. So it is both. It is a lot of, I'm going to plan out a path and repeat it again and again and again and again. And then other times it's, I have no plan. I'm going to get from here to there in a straight line, and all the obstacles in my path, I'm just going to figure it out. And then if you're kind of just getting started, you can do that with some very simple moves. You can do that just by clambering over a rail and kind of just barely getting over the other side. That's still practicing parkour, because for you that's challenging, for you that's your process of growth. For somebody else, they might need to throw in a bunch of flips because they're so good at it, and for them what's challenging is adding acrobatics, adding some more exciting movements that would not be accessible if you were just beginning.
Yeah. Let's talk about parkour in the context of Hong Kong or in Asia.
Right.
Is there a growing popularity? Because you're originally from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the US. I grew up in Ecuador, and so I practiced in both places. I actually started in Ecuador, and I definitely see it growing around the world, including Hong Kong, everywhere in Asia. There's lots of communities in places like Singapore. I've seen it in the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. All of these places, every country has some sort of parkour community, sometimes small, sometimes big. And in Hong Kong specifically, it has a lot of people practicing, mostly scattered. So you have people who are out in the new territories who are kind of doing their own thing. You have some people on the island. Like, I practice mostly on the eastern part of Hong Kong Island, and although I try to connect with people wherever I can, a lot of times it's just the people who live on Hong Kong Island who go.
Are there a lot of French people practicing parkour? The reason I ask is a lot of my French friends do this.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Well, if you were to ask most people where parkour started, they would say France. I think that
maybe it's something that they grew up with.
That is where the name comes from. It's still a relatively kind of, I guess you could say, underground discipline, though, where the people who are interested in it probably are not as interested in like mainstream sports, for example. And so in that sense, it's a little bit of a kind of like, no, this is our thing, and we're not necessarily just gonna invite everybody to do it. But I'm also trying to change that a little bit to make it more accessible and make it anyone's invited. So yeah, there are people in France, I know for sure, that have big communities, and I know that I've met maybe 2 people in Hong Kong who are French who practice, but not with me on a regular basis. So I don't know them very well.
Is Sophie one of them? Sorry, Sophie's my friend who practices parkour. But
never met her.
So you did you say you learned parkour in Ecuador? How did you first come across this?
I'm always learning parkour. Yeah, I started in about 2006, and at the time I was living in Ecuador because I lived there for about 11 years growing up. And yeah, I started in Ecuador with my friends there, and most people like me just kind of saw it in movies. For example, James Bond, Casino Royale, that features a chase scene at the very beginning featuring one of the founders of the discipline, who is French, Sébastien Foucault, and in the movie he's the bad guy being chased, actually, but he's using parkour skills and he's doing all kinds of huge jumps and stuff, so it's very exciting and intense to watch. So I saw movies like that, I saw movies like a movie called Yamakasi, which is also the name of one of the founding groups. And
Sounds
then,
quite Japanese.
yeah, they took it's actually, I believe, a Lingala word.
Okay.
A lot of the guys who started in the suburbs of France were kind of children of immigrants, so some of them from African parents or maybe the second or third generation parents from Africa, some of them Vietnamese, and so it's that's also kind of deep rooted in the history of parkour, of it being an immigrant discipline, but very French at the same time, because the practitioners are very much French as well.
Yeah. So you decided to bring it with you to Hong Kong as well. You teach it as well. You teach children and young adults as well. Is it quite a popular discipline? Are we seeing children wanting to learn this? Would you call it a sport, sort of?
Yeah, it's funny because what I've seen so far is that in Hong Kong, parents of foreigners are excited for their kids to do it, and then parents of, I guess you would say, local parents are a little bit more nervous about it and don't really know what it is yet. So I think somehow it has a popularity with young people, and it has a popularity even with slightly older people, like adults, even people who are maybe in their 40s in the US and other Western countries. But in Hong Kong, for some reason, that interest is mostly around young people still. Older people either don't know what it is, or they think it's some kind of hooligan activity, which,
hooligan activity.
Yeah,
Well,
it's different. So
just before we started the interview, I was saying, when I first saw it, and sort of at the park, I sort of associated with skateboarding in a way, because they would go up the ramps and do different tricks, if you like. Have you heard of that comparison before?
yeah, I've heard that a lot. I think that when I first started, I was like, oh man, it's like skateboarding with no skateboard.
Yes.
And I've heard that a lot, and then since then, practicing for a long time at this point, and at this point, that's kind of like, no.
It's nothing like that.
It's not like that at all. I think that it's fair to say that there are things you can compare between the two, but parkour has a lot of things within its philosophy that distinguish it a lot. Part of that being that it has more of a philosophy of being strong to be useful. That's one of the kind of mottos that comes from the founders. And generally, not everyone is exactly the same. It's not just a monolith of a community, but many people in the community would argue for preserving the environments that we use and taking care of the spaces that we use. So there was a campaign that persists in some places called Leave No Trace, which meant every time you would go and practice in a place, the idea is to leave it looking better than when you arrived. So where in skateboard, you inherently are going to have some damage to the surfaces you use by grinding on it and scraping stuff. It's really hard to avoid because you're using a skateboard that doesn't really go well with the surfaces of the city. It scratches them up and stuff. In parkour, we try our hardest to not do that, and generally it's not really an issue in the first place because we're not scraping our skateboards on stuff. So
Stay careful, we've got some skateboarders listening.
To be honest, a lot of people who practice parkour either started as skateboarders, and I think skateboarding is awesome, but there is that distinction that is clear, that is skateboarding does cause a little bit of damage, and parkour, if you are causing damage, it's because you are not being careful about it. But it's pretty easy to say, okay, this rail is loose, let's not jump on it and bend it out of shape and break it. You can just move on, and that's part of the community, and it probably is in some parts of the community of skating, but I don't know how mainstream that is.
Yeah, I think in recent years there's also that association between parkour and also rooftoping as well, moving from A to B as well, and there's a negative connotation associated with rooftoping, namely the danger of it. It's a topic that we've touched on the 123 show before. We actually interviewed a rooftopper, and she did it for the thrill. She's also a photographer as well, so it's partly for her art as well. But that there is a danger associated with rooftoping. And is that sort of being filtered down to parkour as well? Do you feel like the discipline of parkour is being tainted by rooftoping, or are the two really linked?
I think that with parkour, there are always going to be people who staying at ground level is not going to be enough of a challenge for them. and there's always, not everyone is going to agree with each other in the parkour community, so there will always be those people who say we should not go on rooftops. There will be those people who don't care what you say to them, and so, there's plenty of people in the parkour community who are specifically seeking out rooftops to go rooftoping on and even do jumps between, and there are plenty of people in the parkour community who choose not to do that, and I think that it's something that just has to be a personal choice, and also I think that if any time somebody is doing something like that in a disrespectful way that goes beyond just their own personal decisions, their own personal safety, that's something I can't get behind. So there are definitely people who have done some even illegal things just in the sake of going up on a rooftop to do a cool jump, and I completely disagree with that philosophy. But at the same time, there are people who will go up onto their friend's roof because their friend has access to their own roof and go up there and take pictures, or go up to a public access space and go up there. I really don't have any problem with that. Then I do see people doing things that are like handstand on the edge of a 20-story building, and I don't personally feel a need to do that, but I also try my best not to judge people who decide to do that because it's their own personal risk that they're taking. And, nowadays risk is such a thing that we don't want to accept as a society. We don't want there to be any risk, and I really also disagree with that. So it's kind of a fine balance between how do we reap the rewards of taking risks while also, not taking the risk so far just in the sake of risk that it ends up being potentially even lethal in its consequences. So obviously I have a lot different opinions on it even within myself, and the community is equally as divided. So all I can say is that for me personally, I don't really go on rooftops unless it's one that is my friend's or my own, and I don't usually do anything that would be more dangerous than just being on the rooftop.
Let's talk about safety tips of for parkour as well on ground level. Let's stick to the ground level now. I think you mentioned just now that perhaps some parents are concerned about that as well, because moving from, I don't know, up the stairs, for example, if you're running up and then you're jumping up, it's easy to maybe roll your ankle. I'm just thinking out loud, but are there any sort of safety tips that you can that people need to pay attention to when they're starting out, or even if they're not starting, even if they're practicing regularly as well?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said before, risk is something that is inherent in everything that we do, and as a modern society, for some reason, we've decided to shy away from it in its entirety, as if we can escape it perfectly, and that's just not possible. And because even when if you're playing football, you can, have some pretty serious injuries, and you can be walking downstairs, miss a step, and tumble down the entire flight of stairs. Risk exists everywhere in everything we do.
Probably more so now that people are looking at their mobile phones so much.
Yes, seriously. But in terms of parkour, it's all about what we're doing. The whole point of learning how to overcome obstacles is approaching risk as something we can be prepared for, instead of something that we'll shy away from and hide from. So the process of avoiding danger, so the safety tips I can give are accept risk cautiously and approach that risk in a smart way. And so I guess the question, of course, is how do you do that? So I always advise people, start small. Just start with some simple moves on small obstacles. You don't have to jump into anything beyond what feels comfortable at the time. And as long as you are, then when you say, okay, this is too easy, find something more challenging. I always advise my students to focus on the quality of their movement, not on the size of their jumps, not on the height of the thing they're trying to train on, the obstacle they're training on, just on the quality of the movement. That's the most important thing. The other thing is know when to walk away. I think that's a big thing in parkour, which is knowing your own capabilities, being able to measure that against the environment around you, and then knowing when you can do something, but also when you need to walk away and say, not today. Because I see a lot of people who are very new, who are so excited about it, and they see all these cool people doing cool things, they want to be like that, and then they go for these huge jumps, and I look at them and go, no, oh my god, what are you doing?
Be aware of your body.
Yeah, be aware of yourself.
You can't do that
But
yet.
then I will tell them, look, here's where you start. Here's how I can get you to that point, because you can. everybody can improve significantly as long as they dedicate themselves the right way. But it's just starting small and going progressively step by step, not jumping into the biggest moves right away.
Yeah, I really like that advice. Know your limits and also know when to walk away for that day, because it's something that you can revisit. There's no rush. It's better than to, go all out and, because people often say, oh, go big or go home. But
no, I'm not like that at all.
not for the case of parkour, because it's true. Come back another day when you're in a better state of mind, mentally and physically. As well. We've got a couple of minutes before the 2 o'clock news. Eric, let's also perhaps talk about the confidence side of things as well. How might it help people sort of boost their confidence as well? How have you seen it boost confidence for some of your students, for example?
Yeah, I have a perfect example of that because I say the words overcome obstacles a lot. Another kind of key term that I throw around a lot is problem solving, because a lot of what we do in parkour is solving problems. How do I manage to do this movement? How do I get to that point? Because I can't do it now, but how do I get there? So not only is it problem solving in the physical realm, but it also, just like with obstacles, it comes back to how do you solve problems in any circumstance. It's just kind of, if you train often how to overcome obstacles of any kind, that's a skill you develop. So then your problem solving in any other circumstance will be improved. You can use that same skill to overcome or to solve problems, even if it's just a puzzle. You know how to separate out the pieces before you start the puzzle. As an example, you learn some skills that you can use. And so I have a perfect example of one of my students he's actually an adult student. He's close to 30 years old, and I have many students who are around that age. And, when we first started, it was scary and physically challenging for him to do a jump up maybe 3 steps. And that's very normal for people who don't move very often, is just 3 steps, which if you just took a big step with 1 foot, you could get up there right away. But jumping off of 2 feet, that's terrifying, right? For some people. And so he managed to do that, and then eventually he did it so progressively, bit by bit, bigger jumps, that now he recently did one that was just like, it blew his mind that he was able to do it, and it was so exciting.
What a positive story to end on. Eric, can you give our listeners your Facebook page as well? If people want to learn more about the art of parkour, how can they find you?
Yeah, so 2 choices. You can find me on Facebook if you just search Eric Roberts Parkour. And the other option is I have a website, which is erobertspk.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to chatting to you next time again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's Eric Roberts, a parkour coach. Thank you very much indeed.
RTHK News.